The wounded stranger. The morning mist clung to the broken cityscape like smoke from a dying fire. Marcus Vale picked his way through the rubble-strewn streets, his worn boots crunching on fragments of glass and concrete. 3 months had passed. Since the failed peace summit, 3 months since the war had erupted again with renewed fury, and 3 months since his engineering unit had been scattered to the winds. He adjusted the weight of his salvage pack, feeling the familiar ache in his shoulder where shrapnel had torn through muscle and sinew. The medics had done what they could in the field hospital, but proper treatment was a luxury few could afford anymore. Now he moved like a ghost through the ruins, searching for anything useful: batteries, canned food, clean water, medical supplies. Survival had become an art form of small victories. The residential district stretched before him, rows of collapsed homes and apartments creating a maze of debris. Most scavengers avoided this area, claiming it was picked clean, but Marcus knew better. His engineering background gave him an eye for hidden spaces, structural weak points that might conceal forgotten caches. Behind the facade of destruction, treasures sometimes waited. He was examining the remains of a pharmacy, cataloging which walls might still have intact storage areas, when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the urban wasteland. Not the usual settling of unstable masonry or the skitter of rats through the rubble, but something else, something organic. Marcus froze, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip. Sound carried strangely in the ruins, bouncing off twisted metal and broken stone in unpredictable ways. He waited, counting heartbeats, straining to isolate the noise from the constant whisper of wind through empty windows. There, again. Faint, but definitely present. A rhythmic pattern that sounded almost like labored breathing. Moving with practiced caution, Marcus followed the sound deeper into the ruins. It led him toward what had once been a small park, now a crater-marked field dotted with the skeletal remains of playground equipment. At the far edge, partially hidden by a collapsed section of apartment building, he spotted something that made his breath catch. A pod, sleek, organic-looking, about the size of a small car. Its surface was a deep blue-green that seemed to shift and shimmer even in the overcast light. One side was cracked open like a broken egg, revealing an interior lined with what looked like soft, bioluminescent material. Marcus had seen pods like this before, always from a distance, always as they streaked through the sky carrying enemy scouts deep into human territory. This one had clearly crashed, its elegant form marred by impact damage and scorch marks. Steam or vapor drifted from several breaches in its hull. The breathing sound was coming from inside. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to pretend. He'd never seen this. Never heard that steady, painful rhythm of air being drawn in and released. The war had taught him that mercy was often rewarded with a bullet, that the enemy was called enemy for good reason. But Marcus had been an engineer before he'd been a soldier. His mind automatically cataloged details. The pod's crash angle suggested a controlled descent rather than total system failure. The damage patterns indicated the pilot had tried to land safely rather than simply falling from the sky. And that, breathing. It was too steady, too controlled to be someone actively dying. Someone was alive in there. Someone who might have answers about troop movements, supply lines, planned attacks. Someone who could provide intelligence that might help end this war. At least that's what he told himself as he approached the wreckage. Marcus drew his sidearm and moved closer, stepping carefully over twisted metal and scattered debris. The pod's interior was visible now, bathed in that strange, soft light. And there, curled in what had probably been the pilot's seat, was the source of the breathing. She was smaller than he'd expected. The propaganda broadcasts always made the Velens seem imposing, dangerous, almost mythical in their otherness. But this one looked fragile. Her skin had a subtle luminescence, pale blue-white like starlight on snow. Her hair was long and silver, matted now with something dark that was probably blood, and her ears, pointed, delicate, rising from her skull like the wings of some ethereal creature. She wore what appeared to be a flight suit, form-fitting and made of a material that seemed to shift between colors. One leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and there was a deep gash along her left arm that seeped luminescent fluid onto the pod's interior. Marcus stood there for a long moment, weapon trained on the unconscious figure, watching the rise and fall of her chest. She couldn't be more than 25 in human years, though he had no idea how Velen aging worked. Young enough to have family somewhere, waiting for her return. Young enough to have dreams beyond this endless war. The rational part of his mind provided a dozen reasons to end this quickly. She was enemy personnel. She'd been conducting reconnaissance in human territory. Given the chance, she or her people would kill him without hesitation. The war had shown that Velens, for all their apparent fragility, were capable of devastating violence when cornered. But Marcus had seen enough death. His unit had been wiped out in an ambush just outside Denver. 12 good people reduced to statistics in some general's casualty report. He'd held Tommy Chen while the kid bled out, whispering reassurances neither of them believed. He'd watched Captain Rodriguez die slowly from radiation poisoning after their transport took a hit from Velen energy weapons. He was tired of death. Tired of the endless cycle of violence that had consumed both their species. Marcus holstered his weapon and stepped into the pod. The injured Velen stirred slightly as he approached, her eyes fluttering open for just a moment. They were an impossible shade of violet, like deep water under starlight. She looked at him with what might have been confusion or fear, her lips moving slightly as if trying to speak. Then consciousness fled again, and she went limp. Stupid. Marcus muttered to himself, but he was already sliding his arms under her slight form. This is incredibly stupid. She was lighter than a human would be, her bones apparently hollow, or at least less dense. The luminescent fluid from her wounds stained his jacket, warm against his skin. Her breathing remained steady but shallow, and he could feel her heartbeat, faster than human normal, like a bird's. The walk back to his shelter took nearly an hour. Marcus had claimed an abandoned subway maintenance tunnel 6 blocks from the city center, far enough underground to muffle sound and hide heat signatures. He'd spent weeks making it livable, rigging emergency lighting and setting up basic amenities. It wasn't much, but it was safe and dry. He laid the Velen on his cot, then stood back to assess the situation. The leg was definitely broken, but it seemed like a clean fracture rather than a compound break. The arm wound was deeper than he'd initially thought, but the bleeding had mostly stopped. Her greatest danger was probably shock and dehydration. Marcus had some medical supplies, battlefield first aid, nothing sophisticated, but it would have to do. He cleaned the arm wound as best he could and bandaged it with gauze and tape. The leg would need to be immobilized, but without proper equipment, he had to improvise with strips of metal and torn fabric. As he worked, the Velen occasionally stirred, sometimes making soft sounds in what was presumably her native language. Her voice was musical, even in distress, with undertones that seemed to resonate in his chest. Once, her eyes opened and fixed on his face, studying him with that same violet intensity. But she didn't struggle or try to escape, just watched him, work with an expression he couldn't interpret. When he finished, Marcus sat back in his chair and tried to figure out what he'd gotten himself into. He had an enemy soldier in his shelter, injured and helpless, completely dependent on his mercy. She could be carrying tracking devices, broadcasting their location to Velen forces. She might recover consciousness and attack him. She might die. Despite his efforts, leaving him with a corpse and a war crime on his conscience. But as he watched her sleep, breathing steadily in the soft light of his improvised lamps, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Maybe this could be different. Maybe, instead of just another casualty of war, she could be something else, a connection, a bridge. Outside his tunnel, the war continued its grinding devastation. But here, in this small space carved from the earth, two enemies shared the same air and the same fragile dream of survival. The Velen stirred again, her eyes opening to meet his. This time, instead of fear or confusion, he saw something that looked almost like gratitude. She tried to speak, her voice barely above a whisper, but the words were in her own language. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I'm Marcus," he said softly, pointing to himself. "Marcus." She blinked, processing this information. Then, with obvious effort, she lifted one pale hand to her chest. "Zara," she whispered. It was a beginning. Bridges across the void, the days blended together in the soft glow of the tunnel's emergency lighting. Marcus had lost count. Was it a week since he'd brought Zara here? 2 weeks? Time moved differently underground, measured not by the sun's passage, but by the rhythm of healing and the slow growth of understanding. Zara's leg was mending well. The break had been clean, and whatever differences existed between human and Velen physiology, bones apparently healed in similar ways. She could sit up now, even stand for short periods, though she still favored her injured side. The arm wound had closed completely, leaving only a faint silver line that caught the light when she moved. Communication had evolved from gestures and single words to halting conversations. Zara learned human words with startling speed, her musical voice wrapping around English syllables in ways that made even simple phrases sound like poetry. Marcus struggled more with her language. Velen seemed to require subtle tonal shifts that his human vocal cords couldn't quite master, but he'd picked up enough to understand basic concepts. "Why did you save me?" she asked one evening, the words careful but clear. She sat cross-legged on the cot, working with a piece of metal she'd found in the tunnel, shaping it with tools Marcus had provided. Her hands moved with precision, creating something intricate and beautiful from scrap. Marcus looked up from the technical manual he'd been reading. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe I was tired of being afraid. Afraid of my people. Afraid of what we'd all become." He closed the book and leaned back in his chair. "This war, it's turning us into things we never wanted to be. I've seen humans do terrible things. I'm sure you've seen the same from your people." Zara's hands stilled. "My unit was tasked with observing your defensive positions. We were not supposed to engage, only to watch and report. But when we saw a human settlement under attack by rogue elements..." She paused, searching for words. "We intervened. We saved them, but it cost us our mission secrecy. I was separated during the retreat." Marcus felt something shift in his understanding. "You were helping humans?" "Some of us believe this war serves no one," she said quietly. "My brother among them. He leads a faction that seeks genuine peace, not just cessation of hostilities." The weight of that revelation settled between them. Marcus had spent months assuming all Velens were unified in their opposition to humanity, just as he'd been told all humans supported the war effort. The reality, as usual, was more complex. "What were you making?" he asked, nodding toward the metal in her hands. Zara held up the object, a delicate sculpture that seemed to capture starlight and fold it into geometric patterns. "A memory keeper," she said. "In my culture, we create these to hold important moments. This one is for finding unexpected kindness in dark places." Marcus stared at the sculpture, seeing not just artistic skill but a philosophy he'd never encountered. "May I?" She placed it in his palm, and he felt a strange warmth emanate from the metal, as if it contained more than mere craftsmanship. My people believe that kindness creates ripples, Zara explained. One act of compassion can travel across vast distances, touching lives in ways we never see. Perhaps your choice to save me will echo far beyond this tunnel. That night, as Zara slept, Marcus explored deeper into the maintenance tunnel system. He'd been meaning to map the full extent of his sanctuary, both for security and to locate additional resources. What he found in a forgotten sub-basement changed everything. The chamber was old, pre-war, possibly pre-conflict entirely. Ancient. Symbols covered the walls, and in the center sat a structure that made Marcus's engineering mind reel with possibilities. It was clearly of mixed origin, human structural elements integrated seamlessly with technology that bore striking similarities to Velen design. When he brought Zara to see it the next day, her reaction was immediate and profound. She placed her palm against one of the wall symbols, and it began to glow with soft light. Others followed, until the entire chamber was illuminated in warm golden radiance. "This is impossible," she whispered, but her voice carried wonder rather than disbelief. "These are cooperation sigils. They indicate joint construction, shared knowledge between our peoples." Marcus examined the central structure more closely. "This looks like some kind of communication array. But the design principles, they're decades ahead of anything either side has now." "Because they were created together," Zara breathed. "Before the war, before the fear and mistrust. Our peoples worked as partners once. The implications hit them both simultaneously. This chamber was proof that cooperation between humans and Velens was not just possible, but had actually existed. The war, for all its devastating scope, was an aberration, a tragic departure from what could be achieved together. Their discovery was interrupted by a sound that chilled Marcus to the bone, the distant rumble of engines above ground. Not the usual civilian vehicles or supply convoys, but the heavy, purposeful movement of military units. "Stay here," he told Zara, grabbing his rifle and heading for the tunnel entrance. But she ignored the instruction, limping after him with determination. "If they are my people, I can speak with them," she said. "If they are yours, you will need me as proof that cooperation is possible." Marcus wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The sounds were growing closer, and now he could distinguish two separate groups approaching from different directions. His heart sank as he recognized the tactical pattern, a coordinated search operation. They reached the surface access point just as the first figures appeared through the ruins. From the west came a squad of human soldiers in full combat gear. Led by a grizzled officer Marcus recognized with shock, Lieutenant Beck, his former commanding officer. From the east, moving with fluid grace through the rubble, came a group of Velens in form-fitting armor that seemed to shift color with their surroundings. Both groups spotted each other at the same moment, weapons rising in practiced unison. The air crackled with tension as two species prepared for yet another violent encounter. "Stand down," Marcus called out, emerging from the tunnel entrance with his hands visible but not raised. "Nobody needs to die here." Beck's weathered face showed surprise, then relief, then confusion as he spotted Zara emerging behind Marcus. "Vale? Jesus Christ, we thought you were KIA. What the hell are you doing with that thing?" From the Velen side, a tall figure stepped forward and removed his helmet, revealing features similar to Zara's but more angular, marked by authority and concern. His voice, when he spoke in heavily accented English, carried the weight of command. "I am Commander Thane Corvus. We search for lost scout. You will release her to us." "She's not a prisoner," Marcus said firmly, acutely aware that he stood between two groups of armed, hostile soldiers. "And she's not going anywhere unless she chooses to." Zara moved to stand beside him, her posture straight despite her lingering limp. "Brother," she said in their native tongue, her voice carrying both relief and resolution. Thane's expression shifted from stern command to sibling concern. "You are injured. What have they done to you?" "They saved my life," she replied in English, ensuring both groups could understand. "Marcus Vale found me dying in my crashed pod and chose compassion over vengeance." The humans murmured among themselves, weapons still trained on the Velans but with less certainty. Beck stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the enemy soldiers. "Vale, you're talking like these things are people. They're the enemy. They've killed thousands of our people, and we have killed thousands of theirs," Marcus replied. "When does it end, Beck? When we've exterminated each other completely?" Thane spoke to his sister in rapid Velan, but she shook her head and responded in English. "I have seen what cooperation can accomplish, brother. Not just in survival, but in understanding. There is proof." "Proof of what?" Beck demanded. Marcus made a decision that would either doom them all or change everything. Proof that our peoples worked together once, built things neither could achieve alone. Proof that this war is not inevitable. He gestured toward the tunnel entrance. 20 feet below us is a chamber built by human and Velan engineers working in partnership. Technology decades ahead of anything either side has developed since we started trying to destroy each other. The standoff held for a long moment. Two groups of soldiers measuring threat levels and calculating odds. Then Thane lowered his weapon slightly. "Show us," he said. What followed was perhaps the strangest hour in the history of human-Velan relations. Two enemy squads, weapons reluctantly lowered but not abandoned, descended into Marcus's tunnel to witness something that challenged everything they believed about their conflict. The chamber's cooperative sigils responded to Velan touch, but the human-designed structural elements harmonized with them perfectly. Beck, despite his skepticism, couldn't deny the engineering evidence before his eyes. The technology was real, functional, and clearly beyond what either species had achieved in isolation. "My God," he whispered, running his hand along a joint where human steel met Velan biometal in seamless integration. This really was built together. Thane activated more of the chamber's systems, and holographic displays flickered to life, showing star charts, communication protocols, and what appeared to be plans for joint colonies on distant worlds. The vision of cooperation was breathtaking in its scope. "This is what we could be," Zara said softly, her words carrying to every person in the chamber. "Not enemies fighting over scraps, but partners reaching for stars." Marcus felt the weight of history pressing down on them all. "The question is, what do we do with this knowledge?" Beck was the first to speak. "My orders are to bring back intelligence on enemy positions and capabilities." He looked around the chamber, then at Zara. "I guess this qualifies as intelligence." Thane nodded slowly. "As are mine. But perhaps there are ways to interpret orders that serve larger purposes." "You're talking about treason," one of Beck's soldiers said nervously. "I'm talking about evolution," Beck replied. "Vale, you and your friend here just showed us something that could change everything. The generals need to see this." "As do the High Council," Thane agreed. "But not as prisoners or propaganda. As partners." Marcus looked at Zara, seeing his own hope reflected in her violet eyes. The war had brought them together, but perhaps together they could help end it. "Then we go together," he said. "All of us. To both sides. Show them what we've found." As they prepared to leave the chamber, Zara pressed the memory keeper she'd crafted into Marcus's hand. "For ripples," she said simply. Above ground, two enemy squads emerged into daylight as something unprecedented, the beginning of genuine peace. The war was far from over, but in the depths of an abandoned tunnel, enemies had become allies, and the first bridge across the void had been built not with weapons, but with trust. The stars, for the first time in years, no longer seemed silent.